I went to a secret party full of men. My husband had no clue. Until that night changed everything. This is the story of Gregory Allen Foster and his wife Natalie Elaine Foster. The invitation arrived on a Thursday, slipped beneath the door of Natalie's downtown office like something ashamed of itself. No return address, heavy cream cardstock, embossed with a single line. You have been selected to attend. She stood in the corridor holding it for a long moment, turning it over, pressing her thumb along the raised lettering. Then she put it in her coat pocket and drove home, without mentioning it. Gregory was at the kitchen island when she arrived, his laptop open, reading glasses perched low on his nose. He didn't look up immediately. That was a habit of his, not ignoring her exactly, but completing a thought before acknowledging her presence. She used to find it reassuring, the sign of a focused mind. Somewhere in the last 2 years, she had stopped knowing what to call it. Traffic? He asked. A little. There's pasta on the stove. She set her keys on the counter. The invitation sat in her pocket like a stone. She had no idea yet that it would dismantle everything she believed about her marriage, about the quiet, orderly life they had constructed together inside this house, with its good bones and its empty second bedroom, and its evenings that ended by 10. Gregory Foster was 44 years old, a senior partner at Creston Meridian Advisors, a wealth management firm that worked primarily with what the industry called legacy clients, old money, old networks, old loyalties. He was precise and intelligent and frequently unavailable in ways that were difficult to argue with, because he could always produce evidence of necessity. A call that ran long, a document that needed signing, a client whose volatility demanded management. He was not a cold man. He laughed. He remembered her birthday. He held her hand in movie theaters. But there was a layer of him, some interior room, that had no door she could find. Natalie was 41, a communications director at a mid-sized nonprofit focused on housing equity. She was the kind of woman who noticed things. The way a conversation shifted when someone's name was mentioned, the micro-expressions people wore when they thought no one was looking. She was good at her job because she understood the distance between what people said and what they meant. She had applied this skill generously to her clients, her colleagues, the politicians she briefed, and the donors she cultivated. She was beginning to understand, applied it much less rigorously to her husband. Their marriage had the surface tension of something intact. Dinner on most nights, weekends at the farmer's market sometimes, a shared bed warm enough. But there was a quality to their silence now, a texture it hadn't had before that Natalie couldn't name. Not hostile, not sad, exactly. More like the feeling of standing in a room after someone has just left it, the air still shaped by their presence, but emptying. She had not told Gregory about the invitation because she didn't yet know why it had been sent to her specifically. The card bore only a date, a time, an address in the northwest of the city she knew vaguely as old industrial, now gentrified into opacity, and a single instruction. Come alone, tell no one. She should have told him, she knew that. But she had looked across the kitchen island at his bent head, at the small, neat furrow of his concentration, and something in her had gone quiet and decided. Not yet. That night, lying in the dark beside him, she listened to the steadiness of his breathing, and thought about all the doors in a person's life that they kept closed, not out of malice, but out of practice. She wondered if Gregory had such doors. She wondered if she had been standing outside them for years without quite realizing she was waiting. He shifted in his sleep, and his arm moved toward her, reflexive, habitual, and came to rest against her side. She didn't move toward it or away from it. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, the invitation's phrasing cycling through her mind. You have been selected. Not invited, selected. As though someone had been watching her and decided she had earned access to something. As though someone had been watching her husband and decided she needed to know. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet street. Its headlight swept the ceiling in a long, slow arc, and then it was gone. She fell asleep without meaning to, which was perhaps the most honest thing she did that week. The event was scheduled for the following Friday. In the 6 days between, Natalie noticed things she had no framework for. On Monday, Gregory received a phone call that he took in the garage. She didn't hear the conversation. She wasn't trying to, but she heard the tone of it through the door, low, controlled. The voice of a man choosing each word with the care of someone navigating something with edges. On Wednesday, she found a second phone in his jacket pocket while she was hanging it up. Not hidden, not obviously concealed. Just there, in the interior pocket, the way a person keeps something they've stopped thinking of as a secret because it has become simply a fact. She held it for one full breath, then hung the jacket up and walked back to the kitchen. She didn't mention it that night, or the next. What she did instead was research the address on the invitation. The building appeared in city records as a commercial property registered to a holding company called Aldrin Group LLC, which was registered in Delaware, which told her nothing except that someone had paid a lawyer to make it difficult to find anything. She sat with her laptop at the kitchen table while Gregory watched the news in the other room and felt a slow, clarifying chill settle somewhere in her sternum. She went to the party. She told Gregory she was attending a fundraiser. Not entirely a lie. She was occasionally required to appear at evening events, and dressed in a way that was professional but not conspicuous. Dark blazer, narrow trousers, low heel. The kind of outfit that doesn't declare itself. The building was a converted warehouse, its exterior unremarkable, its interior meticulously transformed. There was no registration table. A man at the door checked her name against a list on a tablet and said, "Welcome, Miss Foster," with the particular neutrality of someone trained not to react. She was given a glass of something sparkling and directed toward what appeared to be a reception. The room held perhaps 60 people. Nearly all of them were men, as the invitation had implied. Men in their 40s and 50s, well-dressed, carrying the particular ease of those for whom comfort in rooms like this is simply a birthright. There were perhaps 8 or 10 other women, scattered through the space, with the careful positioning of people who understood they were there for a reason, but had not yet been told what it was. Natalie stood near the windows and watched. A man separated from a nearby group and moved toward her with the practiced momentum of someone at ease in rooms where momentum is currency. He was perhaps 50, with a runner's build and close-cropped silver hair and eyes that assessed quietly without appearing to. "Lucas Reinhardt," he said, extending his hand. "Natalie Foster." Something moved across his face, barely perceptible, the flicker of a match being struck and immediately covered. He recovered it so quickly she almost doubted herself. "Foster," he repeated. "You work in communications, don't you? Housing policy space." "That's right." She studied him. "You know my work?" "I know your husband," he said it, simply, without inflection, the way someone mentions the weather. A fact, not a revelation. "Gregory and I have been in the same rooms a number of times professionally. He's never mentioned you." "No," Lucas said, and looked into his glass. "I don't imagine he would." There was a long pause. Around them the room murmured and moved. "Why am I here, Mr. Reinhardt?" He looked at her steadily. "That's a good question. The better one might be why you came." "I was curious. Most people who are curious don't act on it. They talk themselves out of it." He tilted his head slightly. "You came alone. You didn't tell him. What does that say about the state of things?" The question landed somewhere unguarded. She didn't answer it. He refilled her glass from a passing tray and his voice dropped slightly, not conspiratorially, but in the way of someone deciding to be direct. "I don't want to alarm you. That's not what tonight is for. But there are people in this room who believe that Gregory Foster has been facilitating certain financial arrangements that don't entirely survive scrutiny. And those people have been wondering for some time about the people closest to him." Natalie's expression didn't change. She was very good at that. "You're investigating him," she said. "I'm not at liberty to characterize it. But you wanted to see me." He held her gaze. "We wanted to give you the opportunity to see us." She glanced around the room with new comprehension. The men whose ease she had read as privilege now readable differently, as the particular stillness of people with a purpose they are not yet declaring. Not a social gathering, a theater of disclosure, patient and deliberate. "I don't know," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Maybe like this story or subscribe or something." She hadn't meant to say it aloud. It came out the way certain thoughts do, pressurized, escaping through a seam. Lucas blinked. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "Nothing. She set her glass down on the ledge behind her. "I need some air." She walked to the far end of the room and stood near the tall windows and looked out at the city's nighttime geometry. The lit offices, the dark gaps between buildings, the infrastructure of a place that kept running regardless of what happened inside any individual life. She thought about the second phone. She thought about the garage. She thought about the way Gregory had placed his arm against her in sleep, not reaching, just resting, and whether that was tenderness or simply muscle memory. She was still at the window when the door at the far end of the room opened and Gregory walked in. He was not dressed for a party. He wore the gray suit he had left in that morning, slightly loosened at the collar now, and he moved with the tight, controlled pace of a man who has been told something he was not prepared to hear. His eyes swept the room in the way of a man assessing a situation rather than entering a social occasion. They found her immediately. The moment lasted no longer than 3 seconds. Her at the window, him at the door, 60 people and an ocean of implication between them. His face did not collapse. He was too practiced for that. But something in it, some structure she had lived beside for 14 years, shifted in a way that told her, without ambiguity, that Lucas Reinhardt had not been lying. Gregory Foster had not come to this party as a guest. He had come because someone had told him his wife was there. They didn't speak in the building. He crossed the room to her with measured steps, placed his hand at the small of her back, a gesture she had once loved for its possessiveness, now reading differently, and said very quietly, "We should go." Gregory, not here. She went with him because arguing in that room, in front of those particular witnesses, seemed like a kind of surrender she wasn't ready for. She caught Lucas Reinhardt's gaze as they moved toward the door. He gave her nothing. No nod, no expression, just the still, attentive face of a man who had done what he came to do. In the car, Gregory drove. This was itself significant. He always drove when he was managing something. For 6 blocks, neither of them spoke. The city moved past the windows in its nighttime version. Amber streetlights, the wet gleam of pavement after earlier rain, the occasional figure walking alone in the particular solitude of people with somewhere to be. "How did you know I was there?" Natalie asked. His jaw moved once. "Someone called me." "Who?" "It doesn't matter." She turned to look at his profile. "It matters to me." A long pause. He changed lanes smoothly, unhurried. "Someone in that room," he said. "Someone who has an interest in using you to get to me." "Using me," she repeated. "You don't know what that gathering was, Natalie." "I know more than you think." He glanced at her then, quick, assessing, recalibrating. She watched him do it and felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not grief, but a kind of cold, exhausted clarity. The way a room looks when someone finally turns on the overhead light, and you see all the things you had been navigating by touch in the dark. "Tell me what they told you," he said. "You tell me first what they're investigating." A beat. "It's complicated." Then uncomplicated. He was quiet for another block. She waited. Silence, she had learned, from 14 years of marriage and 12 years of professional life, was not emptiness. It had weight and shape. Gregory's silences had always been structured. She understood now that they had been managed. "There were financial structures," he said finally. "At Creston, over a number of years, money moving through accounts in ways that weren't visible." He paused. "I was aware of some of it, not all. I made decisions about what to question and what to let pass. What kind of money. Clients whose sources of wealth weren't entirely." He stopped again. "Clean." The word dropped between them. Natalie looked forward at the road. She thought about all the mornings of the last 14 years, the breakfast conversations about ordinary things, his reasonableness, his steadiness, his careful management of every situation that contained risk. She had admired it. She now understood, been enclosed by it. "The second phone," she said. A pause that told her everything. "How long have you known?" he asked. "I found it Wednesday." She kept her voice even. "I didn't say anything." "Why?" She considered this honestly. "Because I wasn't sure what I would do with the answer." He pulled into their street. The house was dark except for the porch light she'd left on. He parked and didn't move to get out, and she didn't either. They sat in the car the way they sometimes had when they were younger, pulling into a driveway after a long drive, reluctant to end the particular privacy of travel. "Are you going to tell them what Reinhardt said to you?" Gregory asked. "I don't know yet." "Natalie, I'm not going to protect something I don't understand," she said, not harshly. "I don't know the full shape of what you've done. I don't know what it means, or what it costs, or who else it affects. What I know is that I found a second phone in your jacket and didn't say anything, and that says something about where we are that I haven't been willing to look at directly." He sat very still. "That's not about the investigation," she continued. "That's about us." Something passed across his face. Not guilt exactly. Something quieter than guilt and more difficult. The expression of a person who has been seen in a way they had not consented to. "I didn't want to pull you into any of it," he said. "You pulled me in the moment you decided I shouldn't know." They sat in the cold dark of the car for a long time after that. The porch light threw its small yellow circle on the front steps. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and fell silent. She got out of the car first. She slept in the guest room, not dramatically, not slamming doors or making announcements, but simply because she needed to be in a different configuration of air. 4 months passed. Gregory moved to a rented apartment in the Franklin Hill neighborhood, a furnished place with good light and borrowed impermanence, the kind of residence that announces itself as temporary without quite committing to when the temporary will end. He retained a lawyer. He cooperated selectively with the inquiry, a strategy his attorney described as managed disclosure, and which Natalie, who had no attorney yet and was not technically a subject of anything, understood as Gregory doing what Gregory always did, controlling the frame. The investigation turned out to be less a federal action than a joint financial oversight inquiry, with enough jurisdictional complexity that its outcomes remained, for months, genuinely uncertain. 2 of Gregory's colleagues at Creston were named in formal complaints. Gregory himself occupied a category the investigators described in a document I was not supposed to see but did, as materially adjacent, close enough to liability to matter, distant enough from direct action to survive it. He would likely keep his license, possibly his career, restructured, almost certainly not the partnership. Natalie didn't follow the details closely. She followed them enough to understand the outlines, and then, deliberately, turned her attention to her own life, which had been waiting for her like a room she had left the lights on in. She threw herself into work with the particular intensity of someone who has discovered, perhaps belatedly, that their professional self is more intact than they realized. She took on a policy campaign that required travel. She went to conferences in cities she had always meant to visit. She had dinner with friends she now admitted, slightly receded from during the quieter years of her marriage. Friends who had noticed the recession but were too tactful to name it. She did not speak badly of Gregory. This surprised some people, who had expected a different tone from her, but she found that she didn't have access to contempt exactly. What she had was something more complicated, a sustained grief for a version of her marriage that she now understood had been partial, real in its warmth and its history, but built on a foundation that had never been fully shown to her. She thought about this often, the architecture of a shared life, and how much of it you take on faith. Gregory called on a Tuesday in late November. She answered. "I'm not calling to ask anything," he said preemptively. "I just wanted to know how you are." "I'm all right," she said. "Busy. The campaign launch is next week. I read about it." A pause. "I'm in therapy," he said. "I've been going for about 6 weeks." Another pause. "I thought you'd want to know. I'm not saying it too. I don't know why I'm saying it, actually. It seemed true, and I wanted to tell you something true." She sat with this for a moment. Outside her office window, the city moved in its ordinary afternoon configurations. "That's good, Gregory," she said. And she meant it. "I kept things from you because I thought I was protecting you," he said. "That's what I told myself. I'm starting to understand that it was also about not wanting to be diminished. In your eyes." She thought about the word. Diminished. "You were never diminished in my eyes," she said. "You were just absent from them, in the ways that mattered." He didn't answer for a moment. "I know," he said quietly. They hung up without resolution, which was honest. She sat at her desk for a few minutes after, looking at nothing in particular, feeling the specific weight of something that is not quite sorrow and not quite relief, but exists in the space between them, patient and unresolved. Lucas Reinhardt had called her twice in the months following the party. She had answered once. He had been cautious, professional, curious in the way of someone who had watched a situation develop and wanted to understand what she knew. She had told him very little, not out of loyalty to Gregory. She had been clear-eyed about that, but because she had decided that she would not be used as a mechanism by anyone regardless of their legitimacy. Whatever she knew, she would carry in her own way, on her own schedule. She was becoming, she thought, more deliberate about that, about the difference between choosing and being chosen. They met for coffee on a Saturday in January, because Gregory asked and she said yes, because she wanted to close something properly rather than let it simply erode. The cafe was on her side of the city, her choice, which she made without thinking about it and recognized only after as a subtle claiming of ground. Neutral tables, neutral light, the particular blankness of a weekend morning in a city that is briefly, almost tensely, still. He was there when she arrived, already seated, with a coffee he hadn't touched yet. He stood when she came in, which he had always done, and she noticed the habit with the particular attention she was bringing to everything about him now, cataloging, without cruelty, the distance between who she had assumed he was and who she was currently seeing. He looked older, not diminished. She had meant what she said about that, but reduced to something more accurate, as though several layers of carefully maintained surface had been stripped away, and what remained was simply a person, tired and complicated and present. They ordered. They talked for a few minutes about ordinary things, her campaign, his restructured role, a film they had both seen independently and could discuss without it meaning too much. Then Gregory said, "I want to ask you something, and I don't want you to answer it for my benefit. Only answer it if it's true for you." She waited. "Do you think we were ever actually happy? Or were we performing it well enough that we forgot to notice the difference?" She looked at him for a long moment. Out the window, a young woman walked past with a dog that kept stopping to investigate the base of every parking meter, and she kept coaxing it gently forward, patient, unhurried. "Both," Natalie said. "I think both things were true at the same time, which is maybe what makes it hard." He nodded slowly. "I loved you," she said. Present tense, abandoned, gently, without ceremony. "I loved the life we were supposed to be building. I'm not sure I loved all the choices you made inside of it. I'm not sure I understood for too long that those were separate things." "I'm sorry," he said. Not dramatically, not with the architecture of a prepared speech, just the plain words, undecorated. "I know," she said. "I believe you." And she did. Which was perhaps the most complicated part, that the apology was real and the damage was real, and neither of those things resolved the other. That a person could mean what they said and still have done what they'd done. That understanding someone's reasons was not the same as absolution. That love could be genuine and insufficient simultaneously, the two conditions coexisting without canceling each other out. They sat with their coffees for a while after that, in the particular quiet of two people who have stopped performing anything for each other. The cafe filled gradually around them. Couples with strollers, a group of women with laptops, a teenage boy reading something thick in paperback with the complete absorption of early reading, before the world teaches self-consciousness. When they finally stood to leave, Gregory paused near the door. "What do you do now?" he asked. Not of her future specifically, not her plans or her living arrangements or her legal next steps. He meant it the way it sounded, the open, unanswered question of a person standing at the edge of what they know. Natalie put on her coat. "I figure out what I actually want," she said, "instead of what I agreed to want a long time ago." She pushed the door open and the January air came in. Cold and clean and indifferent, the way the world is when it has no opinion about your grief. She walked to her car. She didn't look back, not because she didn't care, but because some things, once they are finished, do not need a final witness. The story was already complete in her. She would carry it forward as weight and as lesson, as the particular knowledge that comes only from having lived something through to its true end, not the ending you imagined, and not the one you feared, but the quiet, undramatic one, that is simply what remained when everything else was done. The morning was ordinary. The city was ordinary. She started the car and sat for a moment before pulling out, her hands on the wheel, feeling the hum of the engine as something solid and present and entirely her own. Then she drove.